And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off.
Go ahead and say it, Ed. Go Tigers!
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
You like that? You like that?
F it. Jamar's down there somewhere.
The New Orleans Saints select Marcus Davenport.
No!
Splash Brothers? Yeah.
It's playoff. Keep going, Brace.
The playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
But ended up, Josh and I both were extremely busy with family in and visiting, and our kids being out of school, and just had a ton of stuff going on. I actually wrote a waiver injury pod for last week and let Thursday slip up on me with a slate of, 6 teams playing 3 games on Thanksgiving, and ended up not even getting that pod done in time for those games Thursday at lunch. So we just took the week as a hiatus. Hopefully it did not impact y'all too bad, and y'all survived and had a good week, and everybody pulled out the win. We're going to cover several of the updates on injuries, a couple headlines, and then go over some top waiver targets from this past weekend on Thanksgiving weekend. Hopefully everybody had a good Thanksgiving and come out well. Nobody had any serious injuries. If you did, we're going to talk about those and some guys to replace those players with. But we're going to jump right on in. Some news and headlines. One of the latest things that happened yesterday, Melvin Gordon signed to the Chiefs practice squad, which is pretty standard whenever a veteran gets signed to a new team nowadays. They sign him to the practice squad. They learn the offense, and then once they're acquainted with the schemes and the offensive plays, they kind of roll them into the offensive playbook, and they'll join the 53-man roster. I don't expect Melvin Gordon to be busy this week, so not really an ad except for maybe in the future, but he is on the Chiefs. But don't forget, he was having some fumbling problems in Denver, and he could just be a depth piece with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who we're going to talk about here in a little bit, on IR now. You have Pacheco and McKinnon, and that's about it in that backfield. So Melvin Gordon might be more of a depth piece than he is a contributor on that offense. But either way, side of the Chiefs, which I know he was finally waived by Denver. He's been trying to get out of there for a year and go to a contender because he wants a chance to win a championship, obviously. And the Chiefs picked him up for some depth. So Melvin Gordon of the Chiefs. Kyler Murray finally came back from his Call of Duty Warzone 2 hiatus that he took, or sabbatical that he took from his team, where he was claiming, quote unquote, to have a hamstring injury. I mean, this is just speculation from me here, but it was awfully coincidental that he had a hamstring injury that kept him out for 2 weeks while the release of Warzone coincided with that hamstring injury. And we all know how big of a gamer Kyler Murray is. So I have went on to speculate, thinking that had something to do with him missing. Of course, we don't know that. I doubt very seriously it did, but it's nice to laugh and play because we know he was playing Warzone probably a pretty good bit while he was staying at home, out away from those 2 weeks off. But he comes back. He's still mad. They lost. Did not look that great. And it seems like every time we watch Kyler Murray play, he's mad at somebody on his team. I don't know what's going on, but honestly, if I was Arizona, I would be looking to move him. I know he's a decent quarterback, but I mean, you do not want toxic players that cause bad chemistry in your locker room. He just starting to seem like one of those guys. I never thought that before, but this year specifically, especially the way he's treated some of his other players on camera, and that we've seen him talk to his coach, it just seems very disrespectful and disappointing, coming from somebody in his position on a team. But either way, Kyler Murray still mad. Probably going to fake another hamstring injury soon so he can play some more Warzone, but who knows. 49ers and Jimmy G goose egg the Saints. I'd heard and had a buddy of mine tell me that this is the first time the Saints goose egged or did not score any points in 300 and something games. That is a long time. But the 49ers defense is ranked in pretty much first in pretty much every category that they keep up. Definitely every major category, but I seen a graphic earlier today that they were ranked first. I think it was like 7 or 8 major categories, defensive statistics, and they were ranked first or tied for first in all of them. So they're playing really hot right now. Would not want to play too many players against the 49ers defense, and Jimmy G is just doing a great job managing that team as far as being a game manager for their quarterback, and that's all he really has to do. And they're on a roll right now. And then last but not least, the White Knight saves the Jets season. If anybody missed it, Zach Wilson, week before last, come out, put up a dud of an offensive performance. I think they, as an offense in the game collectively, only had 100 and something yards, 3 points, and their defense held New England to 3 points and ended up losing at the end of the game on a walk-off punt return for a touchdown. And after the game, Zach Wilson was asked if he felt like his offense underperformed and was the reason they lost that game after their defense held the New England Patriots to 3 points. And Zach Wilson's response was no. And let's just say the coach and his teammates did not take kindly to not taking responsibility for the underwhelming performance of their offense and him being the leader of that said offense. So sequentially, Zach Wilson was benched after that and seems like he's going to be benched going forward. And Mike White was named the starter and comes in and puts up 30 something on a, let's see. Yeah, they put up 31 points and beat a pretty hot Chicago team. Now, Chicago's defense has not been playing that well, but their offense has been on a roll, but ended up Justin Fields was out after he separated his shoulder week before last. So either way, Mike White comes in, starts for Zach Wilson, puts up 31 points at home against Chicago in some tough weather, and really looked pretty solid as a game. He really looked like a Jimmy G-esque type quarterback, just getting the ball to his playmakers, let them make plays, and they made plays, which was pretty nice for the Jets because their defense has been extremely good this year. The number 5 defense in fantasy, and probably going to be, I think, by the end season, if Mike White can manage their offense and keep their defense from being on the field too much, probably a top 3 defense. I don't think they're going to be the number 1 with the 49ers, and New England's defense still looks very good, even though their offense has been struggling. But I think they're going to be a top 3, 2 or 3 defense at the end of the year, being at number 5 right now. But moving on, we're going to go roll right on into our injuries. Christian McCaffrey emerged with a knee irritation is what the coach called it. I don't know what that is, but we're going to call it a knee injury that they're not being very specific about, but it's a knee irritation. Shanahan, the coach, says day-to-day, not serious. I mean, we've heard that before about McCaffrey, and then he ends up missing a week here just to give him rest. Honestly, the 49ers have been playing well, but during this game, they also lost Elijah Mitchell to a fairly serious knee injury that's going to cost him 6 to 8 weeks. They're going to put him on IR. So they get pretty thin at running back at the 49ers. So Jordan Mason's going to be bumped up Tyson David Davis Price, the rookie at LSU, is going to get a little bump. And we will see if they end up seeking possibly another running back, either out of free agency or one off a practice squad from another team. But either way, CMC, if he ends up being okay, I don't see any reason why they'd worry about doing that. And that'd be great for CMC owners because up until this point, they've kind of throttled him back a little bit. He's been scoring plenty of points, but not like he has in the past because he hasn't quite been getting that Carolina volume there in San Francisco. But we will see where this goes. Knee irritation for McCaffrey. Day to day, not serious. I'd watch the practice. Moving on, Joe Mixon was eventually ruled out last week. Samaje Perine filled in valiantly if you picked him up, but it looks like Joe Mixon will return. I would not completely drop Samaje Perine yet because he looked really good and might be one of the best handcuffs in the league right now because there's not too many other backups that can step in and be a bell cow catching and running the ball like Samaje Perine does on a high-powered offense like Cincinnati. But looks like Joe Mixon will be back this week. He's already been cleared to play in practice. Next will be Leonard Fournette, had a hip pointer or a hip injury, was out last week. There's been no new updates, but also another one, Rashad White, who I've talked about several times on this pod, filled in admirably and looked like a really solid running back. He was already starting to take over the lead running back role. And honestly, I kind of see their positions flipped where I think Rashad White is going to lead this backfield like Fournette was. And I think we're going to see Fournette about 5 to 10 carries a game, maybe 1 to 2 catches in that same role that Rashad White was playing before, and maybe more of a goal line back since he is a bigger back. But moving on, Jamar Chase ruled out last week, did start practicing last week, but was eventually ruled out not quite ready to return, but he will return this week. So good news for Jamar Chase owners. Travis Etienne played about a hot minute. Not a cold minute, a hot minute, which was not very long in this game. I would know because I started him, and I got a notification right after the game started that he has a foot injury, and they're calling it a foot sprain, and they're labeling him as day-to-day, and he's already been cleared, but they said he was cleared during the game, and he never was put back in the game this past weekend. So that tells me they're either being really, really cautious or there's more to this than what they're leading on to say. Either way, watch Travis Etienne's practice schedule, see what they're saying about him, and if he's listed on the injury report at the end of the week. But I would temper my expectations, and we're going to talk about his replacement a little bit later on. Najee Harris was actually having a decent game on Monday night, and there toward the end of the game, I think sometime in the third quarter, ends up with an abdominal injury, goes out of the game, comes back in on a goal line set, scores a touchdown, goes in at halftime, and then's ruled out. I'm sorry, I said third quarter earlier. I meant second quarter, and is ruled out for the rest of the game at halftime. So there's been no update. They're just calling it abdominal injury. Don't know if it's a hernia. Don't know if it's a muscle, but that's what they're calling it. It's abdominal. I just watch his practice schedule and see if they give some updates. Also, what happened while we were gone last week, Dallas Goedert with his shoulder injury was put on IR and ruled out for at least 4 weeks. They do expect him to return sometime this season, but he was ruled out last week and will be put on IR. So he's got at least 3 more weeks on IR before he's eligible to return. Justin Fields dislocated and partially tore a few ligaments in his left shoulder. That would be his non-throwing shoulder. Thank goodness for Justin Fields owners. He was eventually ruled out last week. I think this was just to give him some time to kind of recover, and it really cost the Chicago Bears the game because their offense was struggling pretty significantly against a really good Jets defense and ended up losing the game. But they're saying that Fields is day-to-day and has a chance to return, but they're not specifying if he will or not. So I'd watch his practice schedule. Honestly, what are the Bears playing for? They're not playing for the playoffs or anything. Why take a chance and risk your franchise quarterback who's looked extremely good? I would let him rest up. If he does come back this year, I would make sure that it's not going to be anything significant for him to be injured to get injured and cause him any significant damage long term. But yep, Justin Fields, watch his practice schedule, but he has a chance to return labeled day to day. Kyle Pitts, also another one that we kind of didn't hit up last week, injured his knee, tore his MCL, and was put on IR, so he's out for at least 4 weeks. Jerry Jeudy, also week before last, ended up with a ankle sprain. They were saying low ankle sprain, but ended up being ruled out last week. There has been no update whether he's going to come back to practice or not. They're kind of in the same boat. He's a young, up-and-coming franchise player for Denver. Why take a chance on him getting injured anymore if you're not going to make the playoffs? Let him get completely healthy before you bring him back. What happened this past weekend, Jacoby Myers went down with a shoulder injury, only played like 30% of the snaps, is labeled day-to-day. There's been no update, but he was listed as limited at Monday's practice because they play on Thursday night. So if you have Jacoby Myers and have been rolling with him, especially Mac Jones being back and playing a little bit better, he definitely looked pretty good this past weekend. I would be watching his practice schedule very closely until Thursday night and be ready to pull him out of the lineup if you have him in there. Moving on, Raheem Mostert emerged week before last with a knee injury and ended up getting ruled out last week. They've labeled him day to day, but they did say that he should return this week. Darnell Mooney, high ankle sprain this past week during the game. We all know high ankle sprains never good. His has been moderate to severe and will require surgery. So he's going to head to IR and likely could end his season. So be looking to pick up Chase Claypool for his replacement if you like that. But honestly, with Justin Fields out, Trevor Simeon's their backup. He got hurt. I'm not even 100% sure who their backup is for Trevor Simeon. But either way, with their offensive woes as it is, I would not be excited to pick up Chase Claypool as Darnell Mooney's replacement. Aaron Rodgers banged up a little bit on Sunday Night Football. Ended up with some rib injuries. He already had a thumb fracture that he was playing through, and now he's going to get an MRI. He was ruled out during the second half of the game Sunday night, so he didn't even finish the game, which is pretty big for Rodgers because he normally plays through just about everything. And they really needed to win that game to kind of stay in the playoff hunt. And I think their chance to be in the playoffs is very, very low. I'm not 100% sure what it is. I think they have a chance, but there's several things that have to fall just right for them to make the playoffs now. And if they do get eliminated, I really don't see Aaron Rodgers finishing the season as Green Bay's quarterback. I really expect Jordan Love to kind of step in, and he could be somebody to watch out for with his running upside toward the end of the season if he performs well enough. Moving on to Allen Robinson, really kind of come out of nowhere. Ended up with a foot injury after last week that did not happen in the game, as far as I know, and it's going to require surgery. He's going to head to IR, and this will end his season. And then moving, so bad news for the Rams. They done lost Cooper Kupp. They done lost Allen Robinson. And then I didn't have listed on here, but they lost Matthew Stafford. They've ruled him out indefinitely with some concussion issues. They thought he had 2 concussions back to back. Then they ruled out another concussion. They really don't know what's going on. I don't know how you think somebody has a concussion and then you just decide he did not have a concussion. I don't know how that works, but either way, Matthew Stafford right now does not look like he's going to be the quarterback for a little while for the Rams. Moving on, Rondale Moore got that groin injury week before last in the first quarter, and he eventually got ruled out last week, and they're going to be on bye this week. So no Rondale Moore. Hopefully he'll get healthy, come back, and get back to performing the way he was before. Moving on, Damian Harris came back for a sip of coffee, ended up getting a thigh injury. Now he got ruled out during the game, and now they're saying it's a multi-week absence, and he will not play this week on Thursday night or for the next couple weeks, which is great news for Ramondre Stevenson owners. And it's really looking like Damian Harris is one of the biggest busts of the season so far. Moving on to CEH, who I kind of alluded to earlier. high ankle sprain week before last, ended up getting put on IR. Is going to miss a minimum of 4 weeks. I have not heard anything about surgery, no other updates, so he should return probably after those 4 weeks, but I would keep an eye on his practice schedule after those 4 weeks are up. And then last but certainly not least, Michael Carter, who was trying to step in for Breece Hall that was injured for the rest of the season. He came in, played about half to 3/4 of a game, and ended up with a low ankle sprain, was ruled out for the game. We're going to talk about his replacements also here in a little bit, but they're listing him as day-to-day. I would watch his practice schedule this week to see if he comes back. Low ankle sprains, it's not completely out of the norm for a player to come back the following week because they can tape those up pretty well, and normally a player can play on them pretty well. And that's going to wrap up our injury portion for after week 12. And we're going to roll right on into our top waiver targets that are owned in less than 60% of ESPN leagues. And we're going to start with running backs. And my number one at running back is going to be the replacement for Travis Etienne. And this is obviously barring that Etienne does not play. But even so, this guy's been kind of making a splash with some big plays last couple of weeks. That's going to be JaMycal Hasty for the Jacksonville Jaguars. This week, he's getting the tantalizing matchup at Detroit, so it's in the Dome. They're 17th against the running back. Their defense is, I think 30th in the league against as far as offenses against defense. So pretty poor. But JaMycal Hasty was already fairly involved in the passing game. And then after Travis Etienne left this game, JaMycal Hasty was the only running back utilized in this game. And they had one or two other running backs active on the roster that they could have used, and they used JaMycal Hasty exclusively. So I really see Hasty kind of being the guy if Travis Etienne is out. They might mix in somebody else for a couple plays to spell him, but JaMycal Hasty is a very quick scat back, kind of smaller guy, but catches the ball really well. That Darren Sproles-esque type role. And I like him a lot if Travis Etienne is out. And don't forget, Travis Etienne has had a history of a foot injury before. So, and with him being kind of the future of the franchise and them not going to be in the playoff hunt, kind of tanking for a draft pick, I would not consider it completely out of the norm for them just to rule out Travis Etienne for the rest of the season. They have seen what they have in him over the last couple of weeks as a total running back, and they're going to want to keep him healthy for the long haul and pair him very nicely with Trevor Lawrence, who's really picking his game up this week. So JaMycal Hasty, number one for me at Detroit, especially if Travis Etienne is out. If he's not out, they could start leaning on Hasty more anyway and not so much on Etienne. So that could be a good pickup for you regardless. Number two, could have easily been number one, is Gus the Bus Edwards. That's right. I am on the Gus bus because whatever number one running back is in Baltimore, that's the one you want. And they want it to be Gus Edwards. And I want it to be Gus Edwards because by far, when you watch them play, he looks the best. But he's had a trouble staying healthy. As long as he's healthy, he's the man. He's the goal line back. He does a little bit of everything for him. And it's one of the best running offenses in the NFL. And you want the number one running back there, and that's going to be Gus Edwards. Going at Denver this week. At Denver, going to be cold, probably windy. They're going to run the ball a lot. I mean, it's probably not going to be out of the rim for them to run the ball 30 to 40 plus times at least. And look for Lamar Jackson to run it a fair amount also, which helps Gus Edwards tremendously. Denver, 15th against running backs. Honestly, that's the best way to attack Denver's defense because their secondary is so good. So I would look for him to lead that backfield and be pretty productive against Denver. Number three for me, coming just under 60%, is Isaiah Pacheco. Like we talked about earlier, CEH got put on IR last week. He was my number one last week because CEH got put out and he performed pretty well. This week he's going to be at Cincinnati. Pretty tough matchup, but he's still getting pretty much all the carries for a running back. And when they do run the ball, he's getting the goal line work. Really still not catching the ball. That's pretty much just been Jarek McKinnon, who has not been getting any handoffs. They've been all going to Pacheco. So if you want the running back that's getting anywhere 14 to 18 carries a game and the goal line work for Kansas City, it's going to be Pacheco. And that's somebody you might want to be interested in picking up. Coming in at number 4, strict volume based running back, because he is the man in Los Angeles for the Rams, and that's Kyron Williams. I've been talking about him for several weeks now. He's finally pretty much taken over by default because they let Darrell Henderson go, who did go to Jacksonville, but just got into Jacksonville, which is why I think JaMychal Hasty is still going to be the guy for a little bit. But neither here nor there. It's going to take Darrell Henderson several weeks. And not to mention, when Darrell Henderson was in Los Angeles, he did not look particularly well. So I would not get too excited. I think that's more of a depth add for Jacksonville because of Travis Etienne's situation. But neither here nor there. Kyron Williams is the man for the Rams. He's going against the weakest against the running back at Seattle, at home against Seattle. They're 32nd against the running back, and Kyron Williams is now the RB1, getting about 80% of the volume of the running back touches in that offense, which is the offense is definitely nothing to write home about. Might be the worst offense in the NFL, honestly, right now, which is sad to say because the Bears is pretty terrible also. But Kyron Williams is getting the catches. He's getting the runs. If they score, if they give the ball to a running back down there, they're still mixing in Cam Akers, but I mean, we're talking like 4 to 5 carries a game max. So I like Kyron Williams a lot. He's coming in at number 4. Number 5 is a combination of guys. Honestly, you can roll the dice, pick either one of these guys. Who knows who it's going to be? But that's going to be Zonovan Knight and Ty Johnson for the New York Jets. And that is if Michael Carter is out. When Michael Carter was ruled out, there was a combination of these two guys brought in. Both of them looked fairly well and put up some decent fantasy points. Ty Johnson's more of a pass specialist. I think he had 4 catches and like nine carries. And then Zonovan Knight had 13 or 14 carries and 3 catches. So both of them could be fairly relevant. It's going to be a decent matchup at Minnesota. But also don't forget, James Robinson was traded there, who was a healthy scratch last week. But don't let that scare you also, because James Robinson does not play special teams. So they had no reason to activate James Robinson if they thought Michael Carter was going to be their guy. But also, if they thought Michael Carter was going to be their guy and they weren't going to give any work to James Robinson, that kind of tells me they don't have either James Robinson's not completely healthy or they don't have a lot of faith in James Robinson. And after Zonovan Knight and Ty Johnson looked very well in a win last week against Chicago, why would you not kind of stick with what's working? So I would not completely be surprised if Zonovan Knight or Ty Johnson kind of took over the workload and led this backfield. A lot of the analysts are saying Zonovan Knight because he is the more pure runner and all-around back because he does catch the ball well as well. And they're going to mix Ty Johnson in some on third down. But I've seen Ty Johnson carry the ball when he was in Detroit several times and catch the ball, and he's looked great doing it as well. So it could be either one of these guys. That's why I put both of them on here. You pick. If it was me, I'd pick Zonovan Knight, but Ty Johnson's going to get passing game work regardless. Even if you picked him and he didn't get a majority of the work, he's going to have a pretty safe floor with some passing, with some catches. So, and then last but not least, the guy I talked about earlier, he could be higher up, but because I think he's going to go back to that 5 carry a game, 1 catch role is Samaje Perine. But to me personally, he is the number 1 handcuff in the league right now, just for the sheer fact that if Mixon gets hurt or goes down, and he's got a history of concussions, coming off a concussion. We've seen it before. A guy comes in, gets hit real hard, gets another concussion. You're going to wish you had Samaje Perine again, because he is a workhorse. He is an every down back, and he looks good and performs well doing it. So I've got him listed last. And this week, they're going against Kansas City. And for some reason, say that Mixon's ready to go and then he has symptoms again, they're not going to let him play. So that could be last minute. So if somebody drops Samaje Perine and you got a spot to kind of stash somebody, I would stash Samaje Perine personally. But Kansas City, 19th against running back, and the only thing is Mixon most likely to be back, so he's going to be a handcuff, which is why he's last. And that's going to wrap up my running backs. I'm going to move on to wide receivers. Number one for me, this guy's been on here several times, Treylon Burks. Kind of a tough matchup at Philadelphia. I apologize. They're 12th against the wide receiver. Obviously, we've talked about that before, but honestly, Treylon Burks has performed fairly well against some pretty tough matchups against wide receivers. So I was pretty shocked. He comes in and he's still only playing 50 to 60% of the plays. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna give you some specifics. Yeah, so 56% 3 weeks ago against Denver. 3 catches, 24 yards, not that impressive. But then at Green Bay, one of the best corners in the NFL, 7 catches, 8 targets, 50 yards. I'm sorry. 7 catches, 8 targets, 111 yards on 50% of the plays. Just half the plays, 7 catches, 111 yards, and he looked like a man against Green Bay. If you didn't see that game, it was a very impressive performance. He looked like a dominant wide receiver one in that game. I can definitely see why the Titans felt comfortable moving away from A.J. Brown. He's not there yet, but I definitely can see that talent on the field when he gets opportunity and when he's on the field enough. And then last week against Cincinnati, another pretty solid secondary. I think they're top 10 in the league against wide receiver. 67% of the plays, 4 catches, 70 yards, 6 targets, and he actually had recovered a touchdown in the end zone that Derrick Henry fumbled. So depending on if you get credit for a fumble recovery for a touchdown or not in your league, actually come away with a pretty solid game. But even if you didn't get that, he still had 11 points. And if you're plugging him in at a flex or a wide receiver too, you're not going to be too disappointed with 11 points, especially with bye weeks going. And honestly, they're just getting him more and more involved. They're scheming up more plays for him, and he's playing more and more, building more chemistry with Ryan Tannehill. And as much as this offense runs the ball, they're going to get a lot of stacked boxes. So he's going to get a lot of one-on-one coverages, and he's going to be able to beat that a majority of the time. If you get a chance to watch him, it's really impressive to watch him play. Moving on to number 2 for me is going to be Zay Jones at Detroit. Zay Jones had himself a day this past week. Unfortunately for Christian Kirk owners, it seemed like it was at his expense, only because. 1 second, I'm pulling up his specifics stats here. At Christian Kirk's expense, because it was against Baltimore, and it seemed like Marlon Humphrey, the number 1 corner for Baltimore, was shadowing Christian Kirk wherever he went, especially in the slot, which is pretty terrible for Christian Kirk owners because it pretty much eliminated him. And Marlon Humphrey has the ability to shut down a wide receiver. But what we did see was an emergence of Zay Jones, who emerged with 14 targets, 11 catches, and 145 yards for 27 fantasy points, which is super, super impressive for this late in the season. But Zay Jones and Trevor Lawrence they seem to have a really good chemistry between each other, and it's really seeming like they've got a really good stretch coming up of matchups. For one this week, It is at Detroit, which we all know, terrible defense, 26th against wide receiver. And then they play at Tennessee, which is worse against the wide receiver than Detroit. And Zay Jones has back-to-back games with 10-plus targets. Well, good matchups coming up. I mean, this could be a wide receiver 2 for you for at least the next several weeks, especially with as bad as Jacksonville's defense has kind of been playing here recently, and Jacksonville's going to have to throw the ball. Now, what a lot of people are going to be scared off is in 15 and 16, they have Dallas and the Jets. But what that says to me is Dallas is going to put Diggs on Kirk, and the Jets are going to put Sauce Gardner on Kirk. So that means Jones is going to have the better matchup, just like he did against Baltimore. And I feel like he's going to get a lot more targets and a lot more attention and probably thrive a lot more than Christian Kirk will in those tough matchups. So I like him against the tough matchups coming up also. So Zay Jones is my number 2. Moving on to number 3, had a down week, not that worried about it, but Donovan Peoples-Jones, I think 4 targets this past week, but he's coming out playing at Houston. They're 5th against the wide receiver, but he's not going to be getting the number 1 corner. That's going to be going to Amari Cooper. And it could be a big game because you know what this week is? This is the re-emergence of Deshaun Watson. And Deshaun Watson can throw the deep ball, and that just happens to be Donovan Peoples-Jones' specialty. I don't know how many of y'all remember, but Deshaun Watson and Will Fuller had a really good thing going with the deep ball there for a long time in Houston. And I think that could be a similar role that Donovan Peoples-Jones plays in that Cleveland Browns offense. Now, just a little sleeper. This is a little extra nugget because he's not on my list, but a guy that I've thought about, and I did hear some more rumblings about to be on the lookout for, especially in deeper leagues, dynasty keeper, but could be super relevant in shallower leagues, is David Bell, for the rookie for Cleveland. Has been looking more and more impressive, getting more and more involved each week, and he is another deep ball specialist and speedster like Donovan Peoples-Jones, and he has quite the pedigree coming out of college. So I like him a lot also going forward. Depending on how well Deshaun Watson, now I will say we do remember in the preseason Deshaun Watson did not look that great. So I would temper my expectations, but this is a revenge game for Watson, also a revenge game for Houston because Watson left Houston. But it's at Houston. First game back, I would think Watson's going to be as geared up to play this game as he will any other game the rest of this year. So Donovan Peoples-Jones coming in at 3. Number 4 for me, Isaiah McKenzie, coming off a big week, had several down weeks, but honestly, it's just hard to ignore the chemistry that Isaiah McKenzie and Josh Allen have. It's not showing up every week, but if you're in a pinch, you need a flex. I think you can do worse than Isaiah McKenzie. This week he's going to be at New England. Not the best matchup for wide receivers, but you got to remember, you got Stephon Diggs taking the number 1 corner. Then you got Gabe Davis taking the number 2 corner. And then you got Isaiah McKenzie taking the 3rd best corner, which he is more than capable to take advantage of. So I like Isaiah McKenzie this week at New England. Probably going to be some rough weather, but we got to remember Josh Allen played in Wyoming and he plays in Buffalo. So he's going to be accustomed to this rough weather. He's got the arm strength to deal with the wind. And I think Isaiah McKenzie takes advantage of a tough New England defense on their 3rd best corner. And also, Isaiah McKenzie has been getting a fair amount of red zone looks. He's kind of looking a little bit like the Dawson Knox of last year for this offense. So I like Isaiah McKenzie a fair amount. He's my number 4. And then last but certainly not least, for the New York Jets, who have been surprising everybody, is going to be Darius Slayton, their de facto number 1 wide receiver. Richie James had a little bit better game this past week for them, caught the touchdown pass, but Darius Slayton had a couple really good opportunities. 1 or 2, I watched the whole game, 1 or 2 on pass interference penalties that caused him not to catch the ball that could have been big plays. And then also another one that he dropped that was a really good deep ball. I mean, he's just a big play waiting to happen every time. And and also, Daniel Jones is not afraid to throw the ball to him. They've got a good chemistry, and they have a really good schedule coming up. So I like Darius Slayton a fair amount this week at home against Washington, 18th against the wide receiver. So I like Darius Slayton a fair amount this week also, and that's my number 5 wide receiver. And that's going to round out my wide receivers, and we're going to move on to the toughest position to call. And like I've been calling it all year, the tight end position, aka the lawn dart position, because you just throw a dart up in the air, hope it lands somewhere close to what you're looking for. And this week's no different than any of the others. There are a couple guys that I do feel like are on track to get some positive regression as far as points, because they've had a couple down weeks and the volume's there, the matchups are there. It's just a matter of time till these guys get it going. But number 1 for me is going to be Foster Moreau, with Darren Waller being on IR, Hunter Renfrow being on IR, Mac Hollins not really stepping up. Devontae Adams can only get targeted so many times a game. So Foster Moreau seems like the number 2 pass catcher in that offense. Last week, not the biggest week, but he had 7 targets, 3 catches, 33 yards, and a touchdown. You like the touchdown part. This week, plus matchup at home versus the Chargers. They're 22nd against the tight end. Honestly, him and Carr are going to get it going eventually. Carr's looking for him more and more each week. I hope he gets it this week, but he's getting the volume, and that's all you can ask for at tight end right now, as hard as it is to find solid production. That's my number 1. Number 2 for me is going to be Evan Ingram at Detroit. Last week, a really dink of a game. I think he had 3 targets, 1 catch for like 4 yards. Honestly, just kind of a game where Lawrence had it really going to his wide receivers, specifically Jones, Zay Jones, that is. So I look for Evan Ingram to bounce back at Detroit, 29th against the tight end. Not to mention, it's a good matchup for Evan Ingram against Detroit's linebackers or safeties, because he's a big athletic tight end. I expect him to get back on track, and I think Lawrence is going to show him some love this week at Detroit. Number 3 for me is going to be Tyler Conklin, with Zach Wilson out of the picture, who was not thrown at Tyler Conklin hardly at all. We got Mike White back in there, and pretty much any other quarterback other than Zach Wilson throws Tyler Conklin the ball that he's ever been associated with. So I expect Tyler Conklin and Mike White to get back on the same page. This matchup where Tyler Conklin's going to be at Minnesota. They're 24th against the tight end. It was a fairly tough matchup last week against Chicago, who's pretty good against the tight ends, surprisingly. So this week, the White Knights coming in to save Tyler Conklin and at quarterback, and I expect him to bounce back. They're going to get some chemistry going. I think Mike White's going to check the ball down to Tyler Conklin a fair amount, and Tyler Conklin's also a pretty good red zone target. So I expect this to be a fairly high-scoring matchup between the Jets and Minnesota. I think the Jets' defense is going to be the deciding factor, and I think they're going to give up less big plays than Minnesota will against the Jets. So, but I like Tyler Conklin this week. He's my number 3 tight end pickup. And last but certainly not least, another tight end coming off a terrible game, which honestly the whole team played terrible, but that's going to be Jawan Johnson for the New Orleans Saints. This week he's going to be at Tampa Bay. They're 27th against the tight end. Last week, Johnson, I think he had 2 targets for 1 catch for hardly anything. I don't even know. He might not even had a catch. But I do know the 5 weeks before that, he had 5 touchdowns in the last – he had 5 touchdowns in the last 5 games. And this week, if you throw in last week, he's got 5 touchdowns in the last 6 games. So he's a big red zone target for the Saints. They just actually have to get to the red zone for him to be that red zone target. But he was actually getting targeted a fair amount until last week, up until that point. So I like Jawan Johnson this week at Tampa Bay, which the tight end position is their weak spot. He's a big athletic tight end, so I expect him to have a good week at Tampa Bay. So, and that's going to round out my tight end position. We're going to roll right on into the quarterback position, And number one for me at quarterback, coming fresh off an outstanding game, is Trevor Lawrence. This week, he gets the great and almighty Detroit Lions, who we talked about. I mean, as you know, I've got several Jacksonville players in my waiver pickups for this week because they're playing against Detroit at Detroit in the Dome. Don't have to worry about the weather. And they are 32nd against the quarterback, which is great news for Trevor Lawrence after he looked great last week. Hey, led the game-winning drive. Honestly, last week he just looked like he made that next step that we look for quarterbacks to make, that as they're just kind of emerging as that new talent at the quarterback position. He really looked like he did that on that last drive last week to win the game. So I like Trevor Lawrence a lot this week. I like for him to get the ball to his playmakers' hands. Not only that, their defense has not been playing well. We know Detroit's offense has been playing well. So I expect this to be a shootout. And honestly, I think Trevor Lawrence has got a good chance to put up another top 10 scoring week, especially with a plethora of weapons that he has in Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, JaMychal Hasty. If Travis Etienne comes back, him as well. Moving on to number two, who I've mentioned several times this week, and I mean in this several times this podcast, is going to be the White Knight, Mike White, for the New York Jets. This is purely based off a matchup standpoint, playing at Minnesota in the Dome. They're 25th against the quarterback. He, like Trevor Lawrence, has a plethora. That is the word of the week, plethora, which means many weapons in his arsenal with Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, Tyler Conklin, multiple running backs to get the ball to, a decent offensive line, and then a solid defense for him to get the ball multiple possessions for him. I like Mike White. Again, he is a game manager, but the good thing about game managing quarterbacks, if they have lots of playmakers, all you have to do is get your playmakers the ball, and they make plays for you and make you look good. So I like Mike White a lot this week with a plus matchup at Minnesota. Next, not last, but next, very easily could have been number one, has been for several weeks. Had a little bit of a down week last week just because he did not have to do much, but that would be Jimmy G. And this week he's playing at home against a very improved Miami defense, which is why he's number 3 and not number 1. It says they are 31st against the quarterback, but I'm pretty sure a majority of those points scored against their defense was before they made their improvements at the trade deadline. And their defense has been playing significantly better since they traded for a stud defensive end and linebacker, and their secondary has started to get healthier. But I still like Jimmy G. Tons of playmakers for him to get the ball to. Honestly, I like Jimmy G for the rest of the season. He's somebody that I think you pick up, plug in at your quarterback, and let him roll. I mean, he's not going to blow the doors off for you. He's not going to put up 30, 40-point games. But honestly, I think his floor is anywhere from 17 to 20 points every week. That's his floor. It seems like that's what he's averaging. I think the most he's probably going to get you is 25 to 28. But it seems like 15 to 20 is his floor on an average week. This week he's at home against Miami. I look for him to score a little bit more than he did last week because I think he's going to have to do a little bit more against a Miami offense that's going to put up a lot more points than the Saints did against their defense last week. Next, and another guy that definitely could have been top. He has been Mr. Consistent the last several weeks. I'm going to pull up. He is worth pulling up his stats because I was hating on him several weeks ago, and he put me in my place very quickly because he has been on a roll ever since then, and that is going to be Derek Carr. He's coming in this week playing against Seattle at home. At Seattle. I don't have him higher because I don't love the weather in Seattle this time of the year. And also their defense has been playing a little bit better as of late, but Derek Carr at Seattle, they're 20th against the quarterback. Not the best matchup on the road also because you got the 13th man there. The 12th man there, sorry. But also, if you're in a bind, I still think you could do worse than picking up Derek Carr and starting him at Seattle. The only other thing, he's rostered in just over 60, like 62%. I had to put him on the list because if he is available, I think he's somebody worth picking up and streaming. Now, some stats I was just talking to you about last week. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm off on my opponents. He was at Seattle last week for this. I apologize. This week, he's at home against the Chargers, which is a great matchup. I apologize. So last week in a rougher matchup, which I had him on my waiver pickup, and that's what happened. I left him on there, and I did not change his opponent. I apologize. But last week at Seattle, put up 28.8 points. On the road, tough matchup. Week before that, on the road at Denver, another tough matchup, put up 24.28 points. Week before that, had Indianapolis coming to his house, put up 25 points. Week before that, at Jacksonville, put up 22 points. I mean, we're talking four straight weeks, 22 plus points against some really tough matchups. Honestly, this week he gets the Chargers. Next week he gets at the Rams. Those are two really good matchups. I think he's somebody you can pick up and stream for the next 2 weeks. The week after that, he gets New England. I would not play him against New England personally, but for the next 2 weeks, I would definitely pick up Derek Carr and stream him if you need help at the quarterback position. And then last but certainly not least, who I've had on here week before last and last week, which you did not hear about because I failed to bring that coverage to you, but is going to be Deshaun Watson playing at Houston. Do I have big expectations for him? No. Do I think he has a good chance to put up serviceable numbers as there are several quarterbacks on bye this week? Yes, I do. And honestly, I think he's just going to get better as the season goes. He gets more comfortable back in a groove. He's got the weapons as he has at running back with Nick Chubb. I expect Kareem Hunt to get a boost from this because I think he's going to get him the ball more. He's not a dumb quarterback. He's a smart quarterback. He knows where his weapons are. He knows to get the ball to Cooper, to do Peoples-Jones, to Njoku, to Hunt, and to Chubb. He knows those, he's going to get the ball into his playmakers' hands, and they're gonna make good plays for him. But he's also going to take some chances down the field, which Jacoby Brissett has not been doing, and that's going to make a big difference also down the stretch. I like Deshaun Watson. And don't forget, he does make plays with his legs also, which is a good boost and good for the Cleveland offense in general. So I like Deshaun Watson the rest of season. Pick him up while you still can. He's got a plus matchup this week at Houston, but he's got some tougher matchups coming up, but I still like him this week at Houston. Just don't expect him to blow the doors off, but I think he could definitely be serviceable. And that's going to round out my quarterback position. We're going to move on to defense and special teams, or DSTs. Number one for me this week, and we're going under 60%. I've got a couple that are just over 60%, but my two under 60%, I'm going to go. Number one is going to be Pittsburgh at Atlanta. Ever since TJ Watt has come back, their defense has looked significantly better. And I like them a lot at Atlanta. They looked pretty good on Monday Night Football again, causing some turnovers, getting some sacks. They're steadily getting healthier on defense. Their offense is getting a little bit better under Kenny Pickett. They're moving the ball a little bit more efficiently, which helps give their defense more of a break on the sideline. So I like Pittsburgh at Atlanta. And then second is going to be Washington at the Jets. We've talked about Washington before. They were on my list last week. They had a good week last week. They're a top 10 defense, still not owned in more than 60% leagues, which is super impressive. Super surprising to me. But Washington at the Giants, we know Daniel Jones is prone to turn the ball over and likes to run the ball and scramble a little bit more than he should against a good, fast, athletic defense with Chase Young leading the chase. I like their chances for turnovers, and they actually have a decent special teams also and have scored some touchdowns this year. So they're 15th against DST in the Giants, but I think Washington at the Giants, and it's also going to probably be cold. New York Giants do not have the best weather this time of the year either. So I like that to lean in the defense's favor. Number 3, I put these are two defenses that I do like better than the other two, but I put them down lower because they're owned in more than 60% of leagues. Number 3 for me is going to be the Jets at Minnesota. I just like the Jets, like I talked earlier, top 3 defense personally, a shutdown corner, and I do think Sauce Gardner has the capability to shut Justin Jefferson down. We have seen it before this season. Number 1 stud corners can shut Justin Jefferson down, and when they do, Minnesota's offense struggles mightily. And also, I think the Jets have a good chance to put pressure on Kirk Cousins. And what do we know about Kirk Cousins? When he's pressured, he does not perform that well. So I think you take away Justin Jefferson, pressure Kirk Cousins. I think that makes for a recipe for a good defensive performance. And I think that's a good chance that the Jets defense performs well. But the Jets are owned in about 69% of leagues. And honestly, the Jets are somebody, they're kind of, unless you're facing one of these super elite offenses in the league, they're kind of somebody that I would roll out to about almost up against just about every team in the league, except for maybe one or two, being the Buffalo Bills. Minnesota was one until I've seen Justin Jefferson be shut down and them struggle, and that's why I like this matchup for him. But honestly, there's not many teams that I would not play the Jets defense against. And then last but not least, Tampa Bay's defense. Honestly, if their offense could just continue to hang on to the ball, control time of possession, I feel like their defense could be a lot more productive. They're still a solid defense in the NFL. They're owned in like right at 60.9% of leagues. But this week they're playing at home against New Orleans, who we have seen struggle on offense several times this week, specifically last week. So we all know, being New Orleans fans, most of us, it's going to be a rough week. It's going to be a rough week this week against Tampa Bay defense has been performing, that can perform very well. New Orleans is 25th against DSTs, which means they have not been performing very well. They're struggling. They can be prone to turn the ball over. I would just be looking for Tampa Bay to take advantage of that matchup, and it's probably going to be a rough week for Saints fans again. And that's going to round out our DST section. And then last but certainly not least, the league winners, especially here of late. I've seen several kickers win leagues for people. And does that mean these 3 guys are going to? I cannot predict the future. Do I think they have a chance to? Absolutely, which is why they're on this list. Number 1 for me is going to be Pittsburgh Matthew Wright. He's put up 13 points in back-to-back weeks. This week, he's going to be in a dome against Atlanta. And honestly, he's hot. He's kicking the ball well, 13 points back-to-back weeks. I expect him to have another good week in a dome at Atlanta. Number 2 for me is going to be Jason Myers playing at the Rams. It's in a dome. They're 26th against the kicker. He's been one of those kind of solid kickers for several years for Seattle. Seattle's one of those teams not afraid to kick field goals the whole game, and that's definitely a kicker that you want to be able to take advantage of in a good environment, which is going to be in the Dome and Los Angeles against the Rams. And then last but certainly not least, been on this list before, had a few struggles this year, but kind of bounced back last week, but has a really plus matchup in a dome, and that's going to be Greg Zuerlein for the New York Jets at Minnesota. 30th against the kicker in a dome, probably going to be able to move the ball very well against Minnesota's defense. And I expect him to get several opportunities in a good environment. So I look for Greg Zuerlein to have another good week this week for the Jets. And that's going to wrap up my injuries and waiver wire podcast after week 12. So we're going to be coming back at you in a couple days with your studs, duds, and overachievers. Studs, duds, overachievers, start, sits, and sleepers podcast. And we're going to come at you with that later on this week. And hopefully this is going to help you kind of fill some holes from the bye week and injuries that we've had happen. And if there's anything you want to hear or don't want to hear on the podcast, please feel free to reach out. We love feedback. Also, please like, subscribe, follow, and download our pod on any of your major platforms: Stitcher, Spotify, Castbox, Apple Podcast, whatever platform you listen to. But whatever it is, we appreciate everything. We appreciate you listening to us throughout the season, and we really love what we do. And we appreciate, and we really want to bring whatever we can to you to help you win your league. So hopefully this helps, and good luck in week 13, and we'll see you later on this week.